Welcome to an invitation to sisterhood. We want you to join us on a journey as we discuss everyday issues affecting our lives. Women in the Bible and of Christian history continue to have an impact on the world even years after their deaths. We can learn so much from them. They are sisters of inspiration, and we're all sisters in Christ. On the show with us today are two men living the authentic masculinity. Johnny Kenaya is a fitness director at a country club and a personal trainer. Joe Secreto is a professional model and a personal trainer. I'm with my co-host today, Ikhlas Bashi, therapist and writer, and Patrice Abuna is executive director of the ECRC. For inspiration on the show today, we look to both Jesus and Mary as our true role models of what it means to be a man and a woman. So ladies, what does that mean today? What is the definition of masculinity? What is the definition of femininity? How do we define it?
Yeah, it's such a great topic, I think. Just talking about men and women and our differences and all of that. I think masculinity, I love that we chose Jesus to be that model for masculinity, and just gazing on the crucifix, looking at him dead on the cross, arms spread wide, head down, and he was just so humble. Just to die such a humiliating death. And throughout his whole life, just what he wore and what he did and how he spoke was always so humble. I think that really shows almost the opposite of what our society talks about today with this arrogance and power being, masculine. And also, I think you can't help but deny his sacrifice. I mean, the sacrifice of dying on the cross, of coming down and being human and dying for us is a great, great quality to look for in a true masculinity. So sacrifice and humility is what I would say.
What about femininity? How would you define that, Ikhlas?
I think we would look to the Blessed Mother as our saint today for the model of authentic femininity. And so that's important to keep in mind, because we're not just talking about femininity and masculinity. We're talking about, that adjective that's in front of it, authentic. Because there's so many different ways to define it, especially based on the culture today. But I love how St. John Paul II has us look to Mary as what he called the feminine genius, who's the ultimate model for authentic femininity for us. And the way she did this was first and foremost through her yes, right, to God. Her faithfulness and her trust and her obedience to God's word, because as a young Jewish girl, she would have read the same scriptures from the Old Testament that we do, and she was formed in those scriptures. So her faithfulness and her obedience and her trust and her purity, I would say, as far as her femininity.
Ikhlas, you talk about the biological components as well. I know you went to a marriage retreat that touched upon that. And I never really thought about that. Maybe people don't even think about the fact that our brains are even wired to be a certain way. God made us a certain way as men and women. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. The male physiology is wired for action. And we kind of probably knew this on different levels. But men sense direction using the hippocampus part of the brain. Spatial relations develop earlier in males, and surges to the limbic system can cause a man to literally spring into action in crisis. And I'm sure you have examples of this, whether it's in family life or at work. If an issue arises, what is the man's first response? It's that springing into action and let's fix it. How can we do this very hands-on? And the other interesting biological fact is that even his retina is thicker with more M ganglions that track motion and direction through space, which also helps him to be that man that God, that being that God calls him to be. To protect, absolutely. Yeah. So that is written in man's DNA, and this is how science points to that, just one way.
And how does it differ from women?
Yeah.
For women, their physiology is finely tuned for human interaction. And their part of the brain is the amygdala, that is the stronger part of the brain. And her retina has more P ganglions to interpret facial expressions, color, and texture, which gives her the ability to be that more feeling person and to go outside of herself and to detect immediately when there's tears, when there's pain, when it's an issue that involves connection like that.
I'm really fascinated that aspect of men and women were brought up in a marriage retreat. The biology, the brain physiology of us and how we operate. Were you surprised by that, Ikhlas, that the marriage retreat actually brought this aspect of men and women into play?
I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised, obviously, and so was my husband. We had been on marriage retreats before, and they had touched on the differences between men and women, but this was the first time that we were in a retreat, which was actually based on the theology of the body by St. John Paul II, where they talked about our biological differences and how cool to have those scientific references to say, you know, this is what the man's brain is wired like, and this is what the woman's brain is wired like. And even the differences in our sensing and our eyes with our retinas.
It's amazing because it helped you, I think, Patrice, you know, we're all married. It helps you understand why your husband would react to a situation that you would react so differently to.
Yeah, and I think even just in terms of being fulfilled, I know we've talked about this before off the air, but in terms of being fulfilled, a woman needs to feel like she's being taken care of, I think, and a man needs to feel like he's being caregiving, you know, and I think that it goes back to the science, but also just somewhere in our soul, every woman needs to just sort of be embraced, and every man needs to be embracing, and without that fulfillment, I think we'll never feel complete. We'll never be truly satisfied as men and women. And when the roles get mixed up, and when men aren't acting like men and women aren't acting like women, is when things start to, the balance is all off.
Okay, and so that's what we're seeing today. So what happened?
Yeah.
What evolved over time
Right.
to change the definitions of what a man is and what a woman is?
I think a lot of things have impacted how we view ourselves as men and women over the years. You could, safely say that it probably started in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and then with the sexual revolution, with the feminist movement, all these things I think impacted how people viewed themselves in their varying roles. But I think the feminist movement, although it did do a lot to create equality for women, socially, politically, and other ways, I really think that it's caused confusion for men, and I think it's caused confusion for women, because one of the aspects of the whole movement was when women tried to be like men. And so I'm not discounting the whole movement, obviously, but this is one of the negatives, I think, that surely came out of it. And as we know from, again, John Paul's theology and different documents of the church, men and women complement one another. No matter how much I try, I will never be like a man. So although we're equal in our dignity, the way that God created us, for sure we're equal in our dignity, but we're not equal in the sense of how I think that the feminist movement
has evolved,
itself.
because I think it upon its inception it served a very important purpose.
Sure.
But then over time it evolved into something that where now the roles are confused.
Yes. I think women tried to, like Ikhlas said, tried to become like men, and I think almost became, I might get stoned for this one, but they became almost too independent, where men don't know where they fit in. Men don't feel like they're needed anymore. And if a woman can't soften herself up enough just to be taken care of just a little bit in those little ways, then men don't know their role, I think.
I think one of the things that really manifested from that and what you're saying is that, so the feminist movement gave us permission to get out of the home, right? Because prior to that, that was the woman's place, right? In the home, raising the children. which is all fine. So the movement changed that, and women realized that they can go out into the workforce and become, members of society where they're, participating in the world, giving their gifts. But I think the way that it kind of went to the extreme is where then you had women kind of denying that whole aspect of their femininity, where they're called to nurture, where they're called to be available for others. I know a lot of women who ended up going back to work full-time, and then later on down the line ended up completely changing gears, because at their core, they really missed being there for their children, and they missed being that part of, family life that they were called to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's instinctive. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to work for myself and from home, is because I wanted to be able to go on the field trips. I wanted to be at the school volunteering.
Yeah.
I wanted to be there when she needed me. I
The
wanted
best
to be
of
home when
both
she was
worlds.
sick. And you do have to sacrifice, and you do give up. But I think your natural instinct is to be the nurturer, and you feel like you do miss out if you're not there.
I agree.
And I think going back a lot of research has shown this confusion is causing problems even in the workforce, because women don't know even how to be in the workforce anymore. I mean, are they supposed to be tough? Are they supposed to be these, bully type of women to survive? And so it's like they feel like they have to be a certain way to be respected in the workforce, and so they're giving up a lot of who they are because they don't think they'll be respected among their peers if they don't.
Yeah.
So I think, it's a complicated situation.
It is.
And makes this more challenge for us as women to raise our own daughters, I think, in the world
It
today.
is,
Do you
and
feel that
I
way?
think with the women's confusion and with the women's reaction to the feminist movement, I think we're almost in the next generation from that original movement, is now we're trying to figure it out, because we're realizing that the men are so confused, and it's sort of confusing the whole balance of society. So,
Well,
I
we're
agree.
gonna find out what the men think.
Yes.
Because we got two coming on the show, and they're going to share with us their perspective on authentic masculinity and how they're trying to live out that true authentic masculinity and looking to Jesus as the ultimate role model of what a man is supposed to be. So stay with us. We're going to be bringing on the show Joe Secreto and Johnny Kenaya. They are both personal trainers, and Joe is also a professional model, and Johnny's also a director of fitness at a health club. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be right back. Welcome back to An Invitation to Sisterhood. We're talking about the authentic masculinity. Our guests today are two young men living a Christian life with Jesus right at the center. Joe Secreto is a professional model and personal trainer. Johnny Kenaya is the fitness director at a country club and also a personal trainer. Thanks, guys, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having us.
So tell us, what do you think society's image of a man is today?
I think society has really built the stereotypical man nowadays to be, Mr. Macho guy who can lift 1,000 pounds and beat up anyone that he wants to, have ultimate strength, really uncontrollable strength, and basically just to be Mr. Womanizer as well, sleep with anyone that he wants to, anyone that he pleases, and that's what they portray in all the movies and TV shows as well.
Yeah, I agree with what he's saying. I mean, that's a lot of times how we're shown. Even if you look at most TV shows and movies, the father is almost always, he's portrayed to be stupid, forgetful, even scared of his wife, and they don't really have that much of a relationship. It's more of a fear, that's how usually they're portrayed. So it seems like that's what society wants us to think that the father is now.
So how do you guys view being a man today? What is your definition?
To me, I think it's a perfect example that you guys are using Jesus Christ as the model. Because myself, and I'm sure Johnny will agree, that's how I strive every day, is to be the man that Jesus would want me to be or wants me to be. Someone selfless, someone that's not afraid to sacrifice, someone that has humility as well.
I completely agree with him. I mean, God gave us, teachings and things like that before Jesus of, how we should act, and people weren't getting it. So he just basically gave us Jesus Christ. He said, this is the blueprint, just be this. And, when we look at Jesus, sometimes people might think, religious men are, soft or whatever it may be because of, their forgiving nature. But if you look at Jesus, if you read the stories about him, he was everything but, soft. He was very masculine. He was strong. He always stood up for, what he knew and what he believed. He told it like it was. And if people didn't like it, he didn't take it back. He didn't try to soften it for the next group. He looked at the ones that were his apostles and he said, do you want to leave too? Go ahead. He stood by what he knew was right and, what he was teaching. And, he's a great example for all of us to try to emulate that.
I'm curious with the two of you, because we all have a story and we all have a journey. I'm curious as to what your journeys have been as far as your walk. I wonder if this is always how you've defined authentic masculinity, or was there something pivotal that happened in your life to change that?
Myself, I have always had a lot of faith. I've had a lot of strength in my faith. So I've always tried to be a man of this nature. But I have slipped up for times in my life. Society kind of made me think that, it was all about the popularity and it was all about trying to,
Fit in some way.
Yeah, fit in and just, even when it came to women, almost to, like you said, be a womanizer. So at times it became difficult, and that became something that I thought maybe I would, the lifestyle I'd want to fall into, and, thank God I didn't, but, a lot of times I did think that I was supposed to. And, I remember one story, I spoke with a priest one time, and this was kind of something that helped me realize that, I shouldn't do that, is, I spoke with one and, I told him how, people were trying to push me towards, being a womanizer and go after these women, especially if they were the ones that, other men were chasing. And if I had an opportunity to, to be the one that, got the girl that everybody wanted. Mm-hmm. And he said, rather than trying to be the one that can rob her of her innocence, why don't you be that one that helps her preserve it?
Wow.
And, that gave me a completely different perspective on how I should act as a man. Mm-hmm. And, so that was one thing that really turned me around.
And that goes back to what we were saying in the beginning when we were defining authentic masculinity, is one of the ways that you do live out your call as a man is being that protector of woman and being that protector of other. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like you were not as happy prior to that, right? When you did come to that realization, you found yourself to be more fulfilled. Is that accurate?
Sure, because I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted. I wasn't sure where happiness was coming from, and I wasn't, a lot of times the world tells you that you want these temporary happinesses, and mm-hmm. I thought if I don't have that, where's the happiness coming from? But thank God it always came back to Jesus Christ, and everything that I've been taught ever since then has always solidified that. And, every time that I choose to do the right thing, it's always reinforced, how to be a man and why I do what I do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Johnny. Mm-hmm. What about you, John?
That hit home for me as well, because, right now I am doing the best to my ability to live out the life that Christ has intended for me. But like you said, we all tend to fall. We have temptations. But luckily I didn't fall, too hard. And that reminds me of a story. I'll never forget it. I was in 9th grade. It was one of my best friend's birthday parties. And 9th grade, we're 14, maybe like 14 or 15.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I called her. I said, do you need anything? I'll get chips, pop, anything like that. So you can picture this, short little 5'0" kid walking in with a bag full of chips and pop. And I walk in and I see people drinking alcohol, making out on top of each other, people in closets, hooking up.
Yeah.
So that really opened my eyes to what
of what society
Yeah, yeah.
is telling you what a man is supposed to be.
Exactly. So Mr. Womanizer, going after any woman that you want to, kind of just getting sucked into, like you said, what society is bringing everyone to fit in, like Johnny said, to drink and hook up with everyone, and that opened my eyes, because that's not the direction I wanted to go into. Like you said, I wasn't happy at that time. I wasn't fulfilled, and that's when I started getting more into the direction of finding my faith, finding what Jesus Christ wants me to be, wants me to live to be.
And you must have challenges with that, you guys, just by the nature of the professions that you have chosen. A professional model, both in personal training. You're kind of both in industries that, your faith is challenged probably on a regular basis. I felt like that when I worked in secular media full time, because I was kind of in the minority in my views. Do you feel that way going after modeling and acting and both being personal trainers, that you're challenged more so than maybe other people because of the professions you're in?
Women don't challenge me. If I look like Joe, maybe. But, no, but I mean, you're right. Of course, in our nature, personal training, we're interacting with lots of women on a daily basis, and we're in a position where they want to get to know us and they want to, give us attention, and it is difficult, but thankfully, our faith and what we've been taught, I know for myself, and I'm sure for Joe as well, has helped prevail.
Joe, you being in the profession of acting and modeling, you're going to face even more temptations than I think in just personal training. I mean, the industry in itself sells sex on a regular basis,
Right.
so you might even have to turn down roles that may not be appropriate for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Being in the industry that I'm in, there is a lot of temptation. So having God by my side, it helps a lot. Just knowing that He's there with me, really to fight that temptation. And like you said, I have had to turn down jobs. There was actually a music video that I was supposed to be casted in, and the director, he emailed me about a day before the shoot, and he said, you need to be comfortable being intimate with the singer. And they wanted us to basically portray being intimate in the bedroom. And myself, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't think it's necessary. I don't need to degrade myself down to that level. But like I said, having God, having Jesus by my side, to just have my faith, just like Johnny said.
Yeah, and another thing is just, as a man, one thing that we don't necessarily, always talk about is like the professionalism. And I know, I'm sure it is with Joe as well. But, even when the temptation ever came, I always just thought, professionally, I can't do those kinds of things. I have to always separate, everything from that, to be a man, and that's a quality that men should have. So, that's one thing that helped with the temptation. If I was tempted and I even played around with the idea for a second, there was a chance I could lose. So when it came to that, I always put the professionalism first, and that always kind of knocked out the possibility of me slipping up.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is how you struggled in the flesh, and with being tempted with things outside of yourself. And I just wanted to share a quote with everyone from Pope Benedict XVI that I think really drives home the point. He says, "Man is truly himself when his body and soul are intimately united. Should he aspire to be pure spirit and to reject the flesh, the spirit and body would both lose their dignity. Should he deny the spirit and consider matter, the body, as the only reality, he would lose his greatness."
Wow. So profound.
So if we're just operating purely from the flesh, then we're not living out that call to authentic masculinity, right?
Right.
What's been, on that note, Ikhlas, and the decisions, the conscious decision that you both have made, what has been the reaction to your peers with your decision? Have you had anybody wanting to know more about your decision to stay true to your faith and be Christ-centered and, kind of live out the life that Pope Benedict the 16th had been quoted, what Ikhlas just read? do you see that your peers have reacted differently to you, or?
When it comes to the peers, you know, in the beginning, some of them pushed back. You know, some of them didn't really enjoy that. You know, especially if, you know, it was friends that we had, you know, similar things that we enjoyed doing, whether it was going to a bar and drinking or whatever it might be. Then, you know, you always have that group of friends that want to go to like strip clubs and things like that. And when you say you're not going, then they're kind of like, they push back and they're like, well, why wouldn't you? You know, and they start to judge you and things like that. But you know, I noticed if I showed any weakness in the beginning, like it wasn't the choice that I wanted to make, they continued to push, and they, you know, didn't perceive it as a good thing. Once I stood strong and I said, no, this is what I want. Like I'm not being forced into this decision. This is the decision I want to make for many reasons. And I explained to them, they all respected it, and they all started to really understand exactly why. And a few of them have actually joined me in not allowing that to happen. And you know, it has, you know, thankfully been a situation where more people have, you know, kind of been inspired in a way rather than pushed back.
How about you, Joe?
I agree with Johnny. Like I said, I mentioned the story back when I was, you know, 14, 15. So kind of shifting away from that, I did lose a lot of friends just because we didn't see eye to eye on our interests. But I lost a lot of friends, but I also gained true friends. Like people always say, they would rather have, you know, a few good friends than hundreds of bad friends. So it really attracted people similar to myself, just because people were inspired by kind of shifting away from what society pushes us to be. So being our own person, living through Christ, living through faith. So it has inspired a lot of people, family as well, especially being in the industry that I'm in and modeling. I almost feel like people are either afraid to have faith or be religious or live through Christ. So once they meet me and get to know me better, their eyes are open because they wouldn't expect that kind of person in the industry that I'm in. So it does inspire a lot of people, and I'm glad it does, because I want to inspire people. I want to motivate people to be themselves instead of getting sucked into what society wants them to be.
Something that Joe said that brought up a great point is, you know, the friends that you gain. You know, I thought about the ones that, like, you know, I lost or the ones that stuck around, but he's 100% right. You know, since I've made that change in my life, you know, the ones that have stayed and are there for the right reasons are, you know, the best friends I could have ever asked for. I remember when I was a kid, I used to always ask my mom, you know, for a brother. I always wanted a brother, and I'm telling you, like, the friends that I've gained, you know, with having my faith, you know, parallel with my friendships has been incredible, and I have more brothers than I could have ever asked for. So,
And when you stay grounded, just like your examples are great, because you're doing exactly what Jesus said, and your whole point is that he even said to his disciples, do you want to leave? When you stay grounded, you bring people with you. When you're grounded in your convictions and grounded in faith, you change lives, you know?
Absolutely. It's a form of evangelizing through the way that they've been converted, right? And those friendships and relationships, whether they're masculine or feminine, are always going to be more grounded when Christ is at the center, because your values are the same, your goals are pretty much the same, and like you said, you're bringing more people with you versus leaving people at the wayside. So I'm curious as to what your you know, there's that scripture about putting on the whole armor of God when it comes to fighting the spiritual battle, because as we all know, it is a huge spiritual battle out there, especially now more than ever. So I'm just curious, what does your armor look like as far as the tools, the practical tools that you use every day to try to fight off the temptation, to try to, you know, fight off what the flesh wants?
if anything, for me, it would have to be prayer. I feel like that's my one and only armor that I really have. Without it, I don't stand a chance in this world against these temptations or against anything else. You know, but through prayer and just perseverance with that, and you know, one other thing actually is like out of sight, out of mind has really started to work for me. So whenever there was any type of temptation, it didn't matter what it was, if it's anger as a man, or if it's lust or whatever it might be, I try to just take myself out of that situation and just get somewhere as fast as possible. One thing I was, telling one of my friends is, if it's lust or if it's anger, if you have that phone, get that phone away from you.
Right.
Walk away from it. Go and, like, if you're lusting, go and run into the kitchen and go and talk to your mom. I'm sure you won't be lusting after that. And it might be silly. Your mom might say, "What are you doing staring at me? Get out of here." But it'll work. And a couple of my friends have actually told me that they've tried it, as silly as it sounds, and the moment passed. You get through it, and then, once your head is more clear, pray for the strength and do your best to avoid that situation again.
That's great advice. I mean, but what can women do to help men, the women watching today, to help men? What advice do you have to them about helping men stay authentic in the masculinity and following Christ? I mean, because you talk about temptation.
Sure.
Okay, so it's not just on television, and it's not just at the bars. I have seen women at church dressed completely inappropriately, in my view.
Sure.
Okay, so I think the temptation is everywhere. And so what would you tell women in terms of helping men stay authentic in their masculinity and true to Christ?
I mean, I would say, first of all, obviously trying to avoid these obvious things like coming to church, dressed improperly, or, but other than that, encouragement. A lot of time, I remember I heard a class talking about, the feminist acts and things like that, and, it was kind of where women were pushing back against men and almost competing. And that's not what we were made for. If it's man versus woman, if the man wins, they both lose. And same thing, vice versa, if the woman wins, they both lose. It has to be a team effort. Everything has to be together. So, the woman shouldn't be trying to compete against the man, just like the man shouldn't be trying to compete against the woman. So rather than trying to be, superior to him, or to try to emulate some characteristics that he has, independence or finances or employment or whatever it might be, rather than that, more encourage him. And I feel like with the encouragement, the man will, rather than trying to, seem like he's competing against her as well, because we get into defense mode, it's what happens, it's that fight or flight type thing. Rather than feeling the need to do that, that's when we can embrace the protector and the love that we're supposed to have.
Mm-hmm. And men need that encouragement, although sometimes I think men may sometimes give off the idea that they don't need the encouragement, or a woman might misinterpret the fact that because he, maybe physically strong or even emotionally strong, that he doesn't need that encouragement, but men do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I think you kind of see that too. You talk about your mom, but on a more serious note, moms, I'm sure, I don't have a son and I don't have any brothers, but moms, I'm sure, influence you as boys growing up to be men and what that means, and the roles your moms have played in your life. I can only imagine. I mean, like I said, I have 6 sisters. I have no brothers, so I didn't get to witness that. Nor do I have a son. But you could talk to that in class, having a son, and you guys are boys. I mean, how much does a mom play a role in helping you define yourself as men?
For me, it's extremely important. My parents got divorced when I was very young, so I had a single mom basically playing the role of my mom and dad. But being raised by my mother was huge for me because she taught me to always respect women, to never degrade them, treat them with, like I said, the utmost respect. And it's played a huge role in who I am today because I almost look at them, I don't know if this sounds weird, but I almost look at women as my mother. Like, treat them as I would treat my mother, with the respect and the love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have a great mom, by the way.
Thank you.
I agree with him on that. He's definitely right. My mother wasn't as much of teaching me by telling me, this is how you should treat women, and and so on. But, she did with the way that she acted and the way that she was, especially with my father. She never had to tell me what she was doing, but I could always tell. She always, did everything for him. She was so selfless, and even in the Bible it talks about the obedience, but it doesn't mean that like she's beneath him. That type of obedience. It's the fact of wanting to the family to
Stay a strong
persevere.
unit.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and knowing that he's going to provide and he's going to do his things, and she was always his backbone. And I guarantee he couldn't do a lot of the things that he did if it wasn't for her. And she was always in the background. That was the one thing I loved about it. It was that humility that you guys spoke about. She was always in the background. She wasn't trying to get attention for it. She, most of the time he probably didn't even know the things she was doing to carry him practically on her back, but she was. So by doing that, it made me gain more respect for women and look for that myself.
And that goes back to the Blessed Mother, what we said in the beginning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because as you describe both of your mothers and their humility, but then you go back and say how very strong your mothers are. And oftentimes when you describe your mom, you're saying she's a pillar of strength. She's the backbone that holds the family together. And she does that not by, ruling with an iron fist or, complaining or whatever, but it is that humility, and it is it's them living out their call. It's us living out our call to nurture and grow whoever other might be, whether it's our spouse, it's our family. And I'm sure, I can only imagine how your moms then go on also to impact society and the world because of their cooperation and their authentic femininity. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And when you were talking about Mother Mary, I kept thinking of the Passion of the Christ and that scene where she, Jesus is being nailed and she's watching him on that. I mean, how powerful, how profound. Every time I think of Mary watching her son be crucified, I mean, what an amazing woman, knowing that he was doing, I'm going to start crying because he was doing he was serving his purpose, And sometimes as moms, we have to know that our children have to serve their purpose, have to live their true life, their true authentic self. And I look at Mary teaching us that,
Absolutely.
and letting go. And as hard as it is, a mother, to watch your child suffer, she knew it was for the greater good.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering, who are the men that have influenced your lives over the years to kind of go in this direction that you've gone? Do you have, either of you have role models you look up to, or particular men that have impacted your journey?
I would say, I have a couple. One would be my father, who, he was always also very selfless. Like, it seemed like him and my mother, if they were in competition with anything, it was who could serve the other one more. Which it's the biggest blessing. I'm just thinking of that now. But he was very selfless always. He worked hard his whole life. He continues to, and he never asks for anything. He never wants anything. He doesn't. He never wants anything in return. He's always about putting everyone else first. And so that's one. And then another one I would have to say is our priests. Especially like a lot of the younger ones right now. There's a few that are around my age, and I've been blessed to have a friendship with them and get to know them on personal levels, and they're incredible. They're such men. They're such great, strong men in their faith and in life. Not just besides the fact that they know Scripture, or they know Jesus very well, and they incorporate him in all parts of their life. That's great, and they do, but even the way that they are with their families, the way that they are with their friends, when we're just all hanging out, they're very strong in what they believe. They always, tell it like it is. They don't sugarcoat it, and they're great role models for me.
Wonderful. How about you, Joe?
For me, it's my godfather Maher. So recently, a few years ago, I've been growing a better relationship with him and getting closer with him. I've noticed, like we mentioned earlier, the authentic man has humility. He's not afraid to sacrifice, and he's a man of God, and he works hard. He's so strong, and he's a family man. He loves his family, and he's just, in my eyes, the just like the model of what I would aspire to be one day, the epitome of the man I want to be one day. So he's been an inspiration to me, just how faithful he is, how loving and passionate he is with his family, and how hardworking he is as well.
And have either of you told these men in your lives how you feel about them? Because that's very important for them to hear.
Yeah.
Hint, hint.
Yes.
I was a little bit of more of a chicken with saying those kinds of things before. You know, being friends with the priest kind of helped me, because I was like, you know what, not only saying things people don't want to hear, but saying things people do want to hear as well, you know. So now I've been able to. It started, you know, with just like writing it in his birthday card and Christmas card and things like that. But now I can say it on a more personal level. You know, I'll walk in, sometimes in a joking way, but, you know, I make sure that he knows it.
They'll watch the show too.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I love what you said when you were describing your parents, how they would outdo each other as far as service.
Yeah.
And Father John Ricardo has said that before, as far as the ultimate way to be, as far as, you know, men and women. And he talks about his own mother and father, that even though his father was a huge executive in one of the big three companies for many, many decades, he was always there as, you know, the family man and being there for his kids, and at the same time being the wonderful boss that he was. But he said that that was an example for him in his home, that he would watch his mother and father try to outdo each other in love and in sacrifice.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So-
I love his stories when he also talks about his dad getting on his knees every day and praying at his bedside to Father Ricardo. That's one of my favorite stories. He was so humble,
Yeah.
his dad. Thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Amen. Thank you.
Stay with us, everyone. We're going to come back with our Sisterhood Pledge. Welcome back to an invitation to sisterhood. We're wrapping up our conversation about the authentic masculinity. I want to thank our guests, Johnny Kenaya and Joe Secreto, for joining us. And what two great examples of guys living their authentic masculinity and really trying to stay focused on Christ.
Yeah, I was backstage watching, but definitely strong men, and just so impressive, especially with this generation, and with, I know a lot of my peers and men I've grown up with, they're definitely an exception to the standard, you know, of what's going on out there. So it's great to see.
It is great to see. I'm just filled with hope to see men like that, because I think that, you know, the culture of death has really contributed to, you know, men going in that direction that's counter to what they're called to be and to become. And I love how they're staying grounded and putting on the armor, whether it's, you know, their prayer life or adoration.
Despite the lack of popularity.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
What really impressed me was they identifying how they lost friends but gained true friends.
Yeah.
You know, and Joe mentioned, you know, it's better to have a few really good friends than 100 not good friends. And I think that's a really important lesson for all of us.
Absolutely.
And I think once you make that conscious decision that I'm going to be, you know, a God guy first or a God girl first, that it may feel uncomfortable because it's against society's norm. But once you make that conscious decision, kind of everything falls into place. And like both of those guys said, that good friends came into their life. And even though they lost some, they were actually able to bring some along with them and change the lives of other people.
Yeah, I think that definitely really helps. I think having a support system, you know, like we've talked about that with sisterhood,
Sure.
you know, but I think that brotherhood is important for them too, for men to have brothers and for women to have sisters that encourage each other in the faith and ask about how's your prayer life, or how is this going, or oh, I know you were, you know, struggling with this, how's it going, and just to constantly keep each other encouraged was so important, is so important, I think, for us all. So,
Absolutely. I think just as it's important for women to create that sisterhood, it's just as important, if not more critical, for men to create that brotherhood. And you know, when you were discussing that earlier, I thought about what St. Paul said in Ephesians 4. So put off your old nature, which is corrupt through deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and put on a new nature, created after the likeness of God.
Wow. That's powerful.
That is very powerful.
The
Very
likeness of
beautiful.
God, which brings us full circle, talking about the likeness of God, back to the example of Jesus Christ as the true
Yeah.
masculinity, that authentic masculinity, true
Absolutely.
man.
And our
yeah.
fulfillment, how it's manifested in and through the image of God and becoming that image of God as we were created to be. Otherwise, no matter what we do, as men or women, to try to find fulfillment outside of that relationship and that intimacy with Christ, we won't be happy, right? We won't be happy. We'll always be looking outside of ourselves to find that identity and that fulfillment.
Which both gentlemen talked about is that they felt that emptiness. They felt that they were lost before they made that conscious decision to follow Christ, you know? And I think we all can relate to that, that there is a hole
Yeah.
that we live. That's why there's so much addiction in the world, is because we're trying to fill that
yeah.
hole that Jesus is supposed to fill in our hearts with everything else around them. And they remind me of the perfect example of living in this world but not being of the world.
Yes.
And I think they're great examples of that, and sometimes we all need that example because
Yeah.
it's so hard to be in this world and not be of the world. It's
Absolutely.
challenging for all of us.
It is, of course it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I struggle too. In my, in daily life, I'll be honest, there's some days when, whether it's because I haven't slept well or I'm not feeling well and I'm bogged down with, chores at home or whatever. But I go back to Mary. I go back to Mary. I have 3 or 4 statues of Mary, different sizes in my house. And I'm always looking to her and saying, help me find joy in these little mundane tasks
Yeah.
every day that are part of my calling, right? I mean, we have 2 teenagers, they help out, but some days are, worse than others. But it's going back to Mary, and it's asking her for those graces, and it's saying, give me your gentleness, give me your patience,
Yeah.
help me find joy in these little tasks,
Yeah, and I think even as our generation, all being women that grew up in this culture, we talked about the true and authentic masculinity, and then the feminist movement, and being the true femininity. That I find challenging too, to just stay true to what my nature is as a woman and what the nature that the Lord calls me to, without taking on some of those, masculine things. I want to be in control. I want to take care of things. I want to, and step back and say, no, I need to be who I am as a woman and allow men to be men.
Yeah.
That's very challenging.
And I love the fact, when you talked about Mary, Ikhlas, I love the fact that both men talk so highly of the influence their mothers had in their life.
Amen. Yes.
And there's a lot to be said to that. And
Yes.
don't discount your role as a mother raising your boys today and the influence that you have on them. And
Absolutely.
and I thought that was really profound. And I'm sure their mothers watching this are, their hearts are gonna melt.
Yeah, but even not so much their mothers. I loved that they said their mothers never told them; they showed them, and I think that's important. Even just as an example with anyone, you might never know if your nephews or your little cousins or someone else is watching the way you're interacting with other men or with other women, and just seeing, oh, okay, that's how a woman is. That's how a man is. I think we all need to be very aware of who we are and how we act, because people are watching all the time.
And kids are the greatest imitators,
Yeah.
and it's not what
Oh,
you
definitely.
say, it's what you do. And it's great examples. And they all, how Johnny's parents fought to, who's gonna be more charitable. And I think that's a great example, because sometimes you think there's this perception in society that, I'm gonna lose myself if I just serve my husband. What about me? What about my identity? And there's something really profound. I mean, in the saying, behind every great man is a great woman.
Absolutely.
Women, we have such influence in the lives of the men in the world. And
I think you touch on a really good aspect of all this when you say our fear of losing ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of the challenge of living out our authentic roles as men and women, because now more than ever, the society is so much on self, and everything is around self. And what can I do to make myself happy, to make myself look
Sure.
good? And I think that has really contributed to us not being able to really live out our authenticity as men and women.
Yeah, I
You know,
agree.
I never saw myself, like my husband's in heating and cooling, and I have a journalism degree, and I found myself learning heating and cooling. And there were moments that are like, why am I learning this stuff? And why do I need to know this stuff? And I actually got joy in helping my husband's company. I never thought I would get into heating and cooling,
Sure,
But
sure.
I think there's joy as a wife knowing that you're going to help him succeed,
Yeah.
and you don't lose yourself. It's going back to this is who we are as a couple.
Yeah.
And it's going back to our models for this show, Jesus and Mary, who teach us what self-giving, denotive love is.
Sure.
And that's where we find our true fulfillment is in giving.
Giving. I loved when Johnny said that if it's man versus woman and one wins, they both lose.
Yeah.
I was like, he's so right.
Yeah.
I mean, either way, you both lose. And it's not about working against each other, but working together.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so powerful.
Well, we hope our viewers enjoyed the show, and we thank our guests again, Johnny and Joe, for being so open and honest and sharing their story with us. And of course, we never end our show without giving you our Sisterhood pledge. Just take one of them that maybe resonates with you and maybe meditate on and see how that you can implement that in your life. Thank you, ladies, Patrice and Ikhlas. Wonderful show as always.
Thank you.
Thanks. Stay with us, everyone.
I pledge to pray for the men and women in my life to discover their true identity in Christ. I pledge to encourage men to find their authentic self in the example of Christ. I pledge to be true to my femininity and to read the Church's teaching on the topic.